The sky of Azures was a deep, iridescent purple, streaked with glowing veins of neon blue that swirled like cosmic currents. The planet, a massive orb suspended in the void, was covered with jagged mountains and vast forests of blackened trees, whose branches twisted in unnatural shapes. It was a world of sharp contrasts, where the daylight glowed faintly pink and the night was a total eclipse, an eternal twilight. The surface was harsh, unforgiving, and wild. Great storms occasionally rolled through the alien landscape, unleashing devastating winds that could tear through stone and sky alike. In the midst of this chaos, the capital city of Ithiara stood as a dark jewel, a towering metropolis built into the mountainside. Shimmering spires reached into the heavens, glowing softly in the pale light of the twin moons. The city was a maze of sleek metallic structures and ancient stone temples, where the elite resided in splendor, while the outcasts lingered in the shadows. Huh? Is really the wealthy, the powerful, and the political rulers inhabited the city's upper levels, while the lower levels were home to those whose fate had been sealed by birth or misfortune. The protagonist, known only as Rhaenya, walked alone in the alleys of the lower levels, shunned by all who passed her. Rhaenya was not like the others. Her skin was a mixture of pale, almost translucent scales that shimmered under the city's cold artificial lights. Her eyes, large and deep black, absorbed light rather than reflecting it, giving her an almost haunting appearance. Her hair, if it could be called that, was a tangled mass of silken tendrils that sprouted from her scalp and cascaded down her back like a living web. Her body was unlike anything the citizens of Ithiara had ever seen, slender but powerful, with elongated limbs that gave her an almost insect-like appearance. Where others had smooth faces, hers was adorned with sharp, delicate ridges across her cheeks and forehead, the remnants of a genetic alteration no one had the courage to understand. Her once graceful wings, now clipped and frail, and the cruelty of her people. We ought not to think the citizens of Ithiara had ever seen, reminders of her long-lost freedom and the cruelty of her people. The people of Ithiara called her a creature. Their whispers echoed in the streets as she passed by, her presence an affront to their eyes. Mothers shielded their children from her sight, and merchants lowered their wares, unwilling to have their businesses sullied by the mere presence of a thing that defied the natural order. She was a grotesque aberration in a society that valued beauty and purity above all else. The loneliness she felt was a constant, an invisible weight pressing down on her chest, suffocating her with every step she took through the crowded streets. Rhaenya could hear the laughter and jeers of the citizens, the cruel words that followed her wherever she went. Monster, freak, cursed. It was as if she was nothing more than a thing to be pitied or feared, a reflection of some ancient curse that had cursed not just her body, but from her soul. The truth was, Rhaenya had been born this way. Her mother, a revered noblewoman of Ithiara, had fallen victim to a forbidden experiment in the royal labs. She had been injected with a substance designed to enhance physical strength and grant eternal beauty, something to elevate the status of her bloodline. But the results had been disastrous. Instead of the graceful and powerful offspring the scientists had promised, Rhaenya had been born as she was, an unholy amalgamation of alien DNA, malformed and monstrous in the eyes of her people. Her mother had died in childbirth, and Rhaenya's father, the king, had abandoned her as an infant, condemning her to a life of exile and mockery. She had been raised in the shadows of Ithiara, cast away to the slums, where she had learned the harsh truths of her existence. Her existence had become a symbol of the royal family's failures, and the consequences of their reckless ambition. For years, she had tried to hide her true form, using what little magic she could muster to blend into the shadows. But it was never enough. The whispers of creature followed her like a ghost, and with every passing year, her heart grew colder, her spirit more distant. She had long since stopped trying to fit in or to change the minds of those around her. She had come to believe that perhaps she was nothing more than a creature, destined to live in the margins of this world. But there was still a flicker of hope inside her, a small ember of longing that refused to be extinguished. Deep down, she believed there might be something more to her than the label they had given her. Perhaps one day, someone would see her not as a monster, but as something more. It was this fragile hope that kept her alive. Nathan had never expected to find himself on a planet like Azurus. He was a seasoned explorer, an adventurer born with a desire to seek the unknown. A routine diplomatic mission to a nearby star system had gone awry when a technical failure led his ship to crash land on the harsh surface of Azurus. Now, stranded far from Earth, he found himself at the mercy of a planet that seemed as inhospitable as it was alien. Nathan was a tall man with broad shoulders, a scar across his cheek, a reminder of the dangers he'd faced in his travels. His skin was tanned from years spent in the sun of distant worlds, and his deep brown eyes, always alert, now looked around in suspicion and awe. His clothes, designed for a journey through the stars, were stained and torn after the crash. But a steady posture and determined air made him look like a man who refused to be overwhelmed by the situation. It was during a desperate search for shelter in the lower levels of Ithera that Nathan first saw her, Rainia. At first, he mistook her for some kind of wild beast, her form so unlike anything he'd ever seen. His breath caught in his throat as she emerged from the shadows, her glowing eyes locking onto his. There was something unnatural about her, a strange alien aura that set his instincts on edge. For a moment, fear crept into his heart. He was surrounded by a hostile, unknown world, and she was the epitome of everything that seemed foreign and dangerous. His initial reaction was to pull back, to retreat into the safety of his human mindset. But then something stopped him. Her eyes, despite their black voids, held a certain depth of vulnerability that made him pause. Instead of recoiling, Nathan studied her more closely. She was unlike anything he had ever seen. Yes. But there was also a tragic beauty to her. It was as if she were both part of this world and entirely apart from it. Unlike the people of Azurus who called her a creature, Nathan didn't see a monster. He saw something more, something that demanded a deeper understanding. His curiosity overpowered his initial fear. "What happened to you?" he whispered, more to himself than to her. His words were soft, cautious, as he extended a hand, not in defense, but in an unspoken gesture of empathy. For the first time, he didn't see her as a threat. Instead, Nathan felt an overwhelming urge to know the story behind the eyes that watched him silently. Nathan spent several days exploring the broken and desolate world of Azurus, searching for supplies and shelter while attempting to repair his damaged communication device. But despite his ongoing attempts to fix his ship and return home, his thoughts often returned to Rainia, the creature he had encountered. He couldn't stop thinking about the brief moment when their eyes had met, and he was drawn to her mystery like a moth to a flame. Each day, he found himself visiting the cavern where he had first encountered her, hoping for another glimpse. She didn't leave the darkness of her hiding place often, but when she did, she moved with a strange, fluid grace that seemed to defy her monstrous reputation. Over time, Nathan began to recognize the quiet intelligence behind her gaze, a subtle understanding that made him realize she wasn't the wild beast that others assumed. She was something else entirely, something misunderstood. Just one evening, as the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the rocky landscape, Nathan found Rhaenia sitting at the edge of a small lake, staring out at the rippling water. Her form was partially illuminated by the dim light, and he could see the contours of her face, her sharp features, and dark eyes that seemed to hold centuries of sorrow. Nathan approached slowly, making no sudden movements. "Regania," he said, his voice calm and steady. "I know you don't speak like we do, but I believe you understand me." Her ears twitched slightly, but she didn't turn to face him right away. Nathan sat a few feet away from her, giving her space, but his presence was undeniable. "I've been trying to figure this place out. Your world, your people." Nathan trailed off, studying her cautiously. "They call you a creature. They treat you like something less than human, I suppose. But I don't see a monster." Rhina's eyes flickered toward him at the sound of his words, but she didn't speak. Her silence spoke volumes. There was pain in it, a deep-seated hurt that Nathan could almost taste in the air. For a long moment, he waited, allowing her to take her time. "You're more than what they think of you," Nathan continued. "I can see it in your eyes. There's a wisdom there, something ancient. You don't deserve to be treated this way." Renia's shoulders stiffened at his words, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she reached up and traced a jagged scar that ran across her cheek, a reminder of the cruelty she had endured. "The others," she began, her voice low and filled with emotion, "they see me as a weapon, a monster. I am not one of them. I was born different. My existence, it has been a curse." Nathan listened, his heart aching as she spoke. "A curse? What happened to you?" "I was an experiment," Rainier replied, her voice growing more distant as if she was reliving the past. "They altered me, made me into something that wasn't supposed to exist. My people rejected me because I was not born in the same way they were. I was a failure, something broken. They wanted power, and they took it from me. It's sometime this hard to—" Nathan's eyes widened with the realization of what she had endured. "That's inhumane." "It was the only way to survive in their world," she whispered. "I don't belong anywhere. They never gave me a choice." For a moment, Nathan was silent, grappling with the weight of her words. He didn't know what it was like to live with the scars of her existence, but he could see how deeply it had affected her. "I don't think you're broken," Nathan said, his voice firm. "I think you're strong, and I think that despite everything you've been through, you still have a chance to be something more than what they made you." Raina's gaze softened and she turned to look at him fully for the first time. There was vulnerability in her eyes, but also something else. Something that Nathan had never expected to see. Hope. Her lip quivered slightly as she spoke again, this time in a voice tinged with uncertainty. Uh, do you truly believe that?" Nathan met her gaze, his heart racing. "I do. You're not the monster they claim you are. You're a person, a living being, and I won't treat you like anything less. The bond between them, tentative at first, began to form with those words. Slowly, Rhaenia started to believe what he said, but there was still a wall inside her, built from years of rejection and pain. She wanted to believe him, to accept the possibility of kindness and respect, but years of being treated as a creature, as less than human, had left deep scars. The next day, Rhaenia led Nathan to the outskirts of the city, where the remnants of an old temple lay buried beneath overgrown vines and crumbling stone. As they approached, Nathan could feel the weight of the place. This was a place of worship for her people, but it had been desecrated, abandoned, and forgotten, just like her. "Why bring me here?" Nathan asked, unsure of what to expect. "This is where I was left to die," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "Where my people abandoned me after what they did." Nathan's eyes narrowed as he looked at the ruins. "You were betrayed," he said softly, understanding now how deeply her past had shaped her. "They treated you like a weapon, a tool." Rhaenia nodded, her shoulders sagging. "I was made to fight, to serve. But I wasn't meant to be anything more than that. They told me I was nothing, and when I failed, I was cast aside." Nathan felt a surge of anger at the injustice of it all. How could anyone treat another living being so cruelly? But as he looked at her, he realized something. Despite all she had suffered, despite being cast aside by her people, she was still here, standing before him with the strength to survive, to keep going. She had been broken, yes, but not beyond repair. And "You're not nothing, Rhaenia," Nathan said, his voice resolute. And I'm not going to let them keep you in the shadows. You deserve more than this." Her eyes met his, filled with a mix of disbelief and something else, something akin to hope. But even as she felt the stirrings of something new, she knew that the road ahead would be anything but easy. The people of Azra still saw her as a monster, and they would never let her go without a fight. But Nathan, for the first time in her life, saw her as something else. A person. A princess. Despite Nathan's growing feelings for Rhaenia, the tension in the air thickened as he realized just how deeply the divide ran between her and the rest of her society. Each day, more people gathered in the streets, whispering curses about her, calling her a monster, a failure, and the last remnant of a failed experiment. Every corner of the city seemed to hold a reminder of how deeply rooted the hatred was. The alien society, which once revered its warriors and rulers, had turned its back on Rhaena, viewing her as a danger, an abomination that threatened their ideals. Whenever she ventured out, she was met with cold stares and disgust. Some even spat at her, and others yelled for her to go back into the shadows where they believed she belonged. It seemed that no matter what Nathan did to show her kindness, the prejudice of her people was far stronger. Nathan found himself increasingly torn. He could see the pain in Rhaenia's eyes whenever they passed by a group of her former peers, their murmurs thick with contempt. His heart ached for her, but he also couldn't deny that the longer he stayed on this planet, the more dangerous it became for him to openly stand by her. His presence was already an anomaly, and his association with her was making the already hostile atmosphere even more volatile. As much as he wanted to protect Rhaenia, he began to question his role in all of this. Could he fight for her dignity? Could he stand against the forces of her world and his own? When both sides saw their relationship as something unnatural, something that could only bring chaos, if he continued to stand by her, would he be risking his own life? Would he lose his chance to leave the planet altogether? His internal struggle grew as the stakes heightened. He realized that protecting Rainier wasn't just a matter of saving her from the cruelty of her people. It was about redefining what it meant to be human in a world where mercy and compassion were rare commodities. The battle was no longer just against prejudice. It was against the expectations of both societies, the world he had come to know and the one he had never truly understood. Would he have the courage to defy both for her? Would he stand by her, not just as a protector, but as someone who saw her for who she truly was? The moment of truth arrived one fateful evening. The city was alive with unrest as the news of Rainier's return to the capital spread like wildfire. She had been summoned by the council to answer for her existence, but it was a trap, a way to humiliate her in front of the very people who had once revered her. As she entered the grand hall, the crowd jeered, throwing stones and insults her way. The air was thick with hatred, and Rainia's posture sagged, weighed down by the burden of years of ridicule. Nathan, standing on the outskirts of the crowd, felt his blood boil. He had seen the cruelty of her people time and time again, but this, it was too much. As the council began their harsh interrogation, accusing Rainia of being a failed creation and a blight upon their world, Nathan couldn't stand idly by any longer. He pushed through the throng of people, his eyes locked with Rainia's, and in that moment, he made his choice. "I won't stand by while you do this," Nathan shouted, his voice breaking through the chaos. The council's members turned to him, surprised by his defiance. "She is not a monster. She's a princess, your queen in all but name. And I will not let you strip her of her dignity." With those words, Nathan stepped forward, placing himself between Rania and the council. The crowd fell silent for a heartbeat, unsure of what to do. The tension in the air was palpable as Nathan, his chest heaving with emotion, prepared to face the consequences of his declaration. In that moment, Nathan knew the risks. He was a foreigner in their land, an outsider with no power to command. But his words were unwavering. The fight that followed wasn't just physical. It was a battle for the future. He wasn't just defending Rainia, he was fighting for what was right, even if the world around him would never understand. And Rainia. And it was his moment of heroism, the moment where he would show that true nobility wasn't found in lineage or power. It was found in standing up for what you believed in, even when the world condemned you for it. The battle had come to a sudden and unexpected halt, the silence in the hall deafening. Nathan's bold declaration, his defiance against the council's cruelty, had struck a chord in the hearts of the onlookers. As Rainia stood behind him, watching the conflict unfold, something inside her stirred. She had always been trapped in the shadow of her own perceived monstrosity, unable to break free from the chains that her society had placed on her. But Nathan's unwavering belief in her, his willingness to fight for her honor, was the spark she needed. With trembling hands, Rainia lifted her head, her once downtrodden eyes now gleaming with determination. She stepped forward, her voice ringing out, commanding the attention of the crowd. "Enough," she said, her voice both fierce and regal. "You have all called me a creature, an abomination, but it is you who have failed to see the truth. I am not what you think I am." As the crowd watched in stunned silence, Renea began to reveal the hidden truths of her heritage. Her form shifted and the air around her seemed to hum with power. The markings on her skin, once seen as deformities, now glowed with a soft ethereal light. Her eyes filled with ancient wisdom locked with Nathan's. Um, Sorry. I am the last of a royal bloodline, Rihanna continued, her voice trembling with emotion. My people abandoned me, cast me aside, because they feared what I represented. But I have always known who I truly am. The crowd, once hostile, now stood in awe. Their queen had returned, not as a monster, but as the ruler they had long forgotten. A murmur rippled through the crowd, and a few of the council members, once so adamant in their rejection of her, now looked upon her with new respect. Nathan, his heart swelling with pride, stepped forward. I knew from the moment I met you, Renya, that you were no monster. You are a leader, strong, wise, and beautiful in ways they will never understand. But you are worthy of love, of respect, and of this world. Renya's eyes softened as she met his gaze. The walls she had built around her heart crumbled in an instant. She stepped closer to him, her voice now a soft whisper. I never thought I could be loved, but you showed me that I am worthy. I, ah, the tension in the room melted away, replaced by a profound sense of relief. For the first time in her life, Rainia felt truly seen. The society that had once cast her out now began to shift, their perception of her evolving. She was no longer a creature to be feared. She was a queen, strong, dignified, and beloved by the one person who mattered most. Mm. And in that moment, Nathan realized that he too had changed. His feelings for her had grown beyond admiration and respect. He loved her not because she was a princess, but because she was her. Together, they stood in the center of the hall, united in their journey toward a future they could both shape. The transformation was not just Rainia's, it was theirs, and the world around them would never be the same. In the days that followed, the alien world began to change. Renea, no longer feared or hated, stood tall as the queen she was destined to be. The once resentful people began to recognize her strength, her wisdom, and her grace. They saw her not as a creature, but as their ruler. Someone who had the power to lead them into a new era of compassion and unity. Nathan, though still an outsider in many ways, had found his place by her side. He had come to this world as a stranger, yet he had become a catalyst for transformation. The bond between him and Rainia was unspoken but undeniable, their shared journey forging a love neither had expected. As he stood beside her, watching the world around them shift, Nathan knew that his time on this planet might be drawing to a close, but there was no sadness in his heart. He had given Rainia the chance to be seen for who she truly was, and she had returned the gift by showing him a love that transcended borders, both human and alien. The future was uncertain, but as they stood together, hands clasped, the world around them seemed full of promise. And with that, a new beginning began for both of them and for the world that would never see her as a monster again.